The dust swirled in the late afternoon sun as Dr. Willa Hawkins hurried down Main Street, her medical bag clutched tightly in one hand, and the urgent summons from the Jenkins ranch crumpled in the other. Snowflake, Arizona Territory, 1885, was not known for its medical facilities, and as the only physician within 30 miles, Willa had grown accustomed to these desperate calls that often came too late. "Dr. Hawkins," Sheriff Taylor called from the porch of his office. "Taking the Morgan boy's horse. Must be serious." "Martha Jenkins," Willa replied, swinging herself onto the borrowed mount. "Fever's taken a bad turn according to her son. I need to get there fast." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Godspeed, Doc." The golden light of the setting sun painted the desert landscape in hues of amber and crimson, as Willa pushed the horse hard along the rough trail. At 32, she had been practicing medicine in Snowflake for 3 years, ever since she'd left her position at a Philadelphia hospital, seeking a place where her gender wouldn't be such an obstacle to her profession. Out here, folks were too desperate for medical care to turn away a woman doctor most of the time anyway. Martha Jenkins' condition had been worsening for weeks. Consumption had taken hold of her lungs, and Willa had done everything she knew to ease the woman's suffering. Now, it seemed, things had taken a dire turn. As the horse crested the final rise, Willa could see the Jenkins ranch below, a modest homestead with a small main house, a barn, and a corral where a few horses milled about restlessly. Smoke curled from the chimney against the darkening sky. A tall figure emerged from the house as she approached, and even in the fading light, she recognized Wade Jenkins, Martha's eldest son. At 28, he had the weathered look of a man who'd spent his life under the harsh western sun, his broad shoulders tense as he waited for her arrival. "Doc Hawkins," he called, rushing to help her dismount. "Thank the Lord you've come. She's real bad tonight." Willa slid from the saddle, her boots kicking up dust as she landed. "How long has she been worse?" "Since midday. The fever spiked and she's having an awful time breathing." His voice cracked slightly. "My brothers are inside with her." Wade took the reins and tied her horse to the hitching post while Willa hurried into the house. The Jenkins home was simple but clean, with handmade furniture and faded curtains that Martha had sewn herself. The smell of sickness hung heavy in the air. 2 younger men, barely more than boys, stood awkwardly by the fireplace. They nodded respectfully as Willa entered. Luke and Matthew, Wade's younger brothers, looked exhausted and frightened. "She's in there, Doc," Luke, the middle brother at 20, said quietly, gesturing toward the small bedroom off the main room. Willa nodded and moved quickly to the bedroom door, Wade close behind her. Martha Jenkins lay on the bed, her thin frame barely making a bump under the quilt. Her breathing was labored, each inhalation a painful wheeze that seemed to take all her strength. Her gray-streaked hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat, and her eyes, when they flickered open at Willa's approach, were bright with fever. "Martha," Willa said gently, setting down her medical bag and taking the woman's wrist to check her pulse. "It's Dr. Hawkins. I'm going to help you." "Doctor," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible, "my boys." "They're right here," Willa assured her, glancing at Wade, who had taken up position on the other side of the bed. His large, calloused hand enveloped his mother's frail one with heartbreaking tenderness. Willa worked methodically, listening to Martha's congested lungs with her stethoscope, checking her temperature, and preparing medication to ease her breathing. But as the minutes passed, the gravity of Martha's condition became increasingly clear. The consumption had progressed too far, and pneumonia had set in. Martha's body was simply too weakened to fight anymore. For hours, Willa tried every treatment she knew. She applied mustard plasters to Martha's chest, administered laudanum for the pain, and helped her drink herbal teas meant to reduce the fever. Wade and his brothers assisted without complaint, following her instructions precisely, their faces grim with worry. As midnight approached, Martha's breathing grew more erratic. Wade had not left her side, speaking softly to his mother, reminiscing about happier times when their father was still alive and the ranch was thriving. His voice remained steady, though Willa could see the anguish in his eyes. "Remember that wild Mustang Pa brought home," he was saying. "The one nobody thought could be broken. And you said that horse just needs patience, not breaking. You were right, Ma. You're always right about things like that." Martha's lips curved in a faint smile, though her eyes remained closed. Her hand tightened briefly on her son's before going slack. Willa moved forward, checking Martha's pulse and breathing. The stillness in the room was absolute as she straightened up slowly, meeting Wade's questioning gaze with regret in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Wade," she said softly. "She's gone." Wade stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable in the lamplight. Then he looked back at his mother, gently brushing a strand of hair from her peaceful face. "Could you tell my brothers?" he asked, his voice surprisingly steady. "I'd like a moment alone with her." Willa nodded and slipped out of the room. Luke and Matthew stood immediately when she emerged, hope and fear warring in their young faces. She shook her head silently, and Luke's shoulders slumped as Matthew turned away, pressing a fist against his mouth to stifle a sob. "I did everything I could," Willa said, the familiar words tasting like ashes in her mouth. "The consumption was too advanced. She didn't suffer at the end. It was small comfort, but it was all she had to offer." She had lost patience before too many to count in her years of practice, but it never got easier. Each death felt like a personal failure, a reminder of medicine's limitations and her own. The night passed slowly. Willa helped the brothers wash and dress their mother's body, then sat with them as they took turns keeping vigil. Wade remained mostly silent, his grief contained behind a stoic facade that only occasionally cracked when he thought no one was looking. As dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Willa stepped outside to get some air. She was exhausted, her eyes burning from lack of sleep and unshed tears. She had grown fond of Martha Jenkins during her months of treating her. The woman had been kind and uncomplaining despite her suffering, always more concerned about her sons than herself. The sound of boots on the porch boards made her turn. Wade Jenkins stood there, his tall frame silhouetted against the rising sun. He looked older this morning, the weight of responsibility for his brothers and the ranch now solely on his shoulders. "Doc," he said, coming to stand beside her at the porch railing, "I never got a chance to thank you." Willa shook her head. "There's no need. I wish I could have done more. You rode out here in the dark without hesitation. You stayed with her all night. You did everything possible to make her comfortable." His voice was rough with emotion. "A body can't ask for more than that." His simple acceptance of her efforts touched her deeply. So many times in her career, Willa had faced blame and recrimination when patients died, especially from men who resented taking advice from a female doctor. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," she said. "She spoke of you and your brothers with such pride." A ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips. "She was stubborn as they come. Pa died 5 years back and everyone expected us to sell up and move to town. But Ma wouldn't hear of it, said this land was Jenkins' land and it would stay that way." And now, Wade gazed out at the ranch, the fields that needed planting, the cattle that needed tending, the endless work that sustained life in this harsh landscape. "Now we go on," he said simply. "It's what she'd want." They stood in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching the sun climb higher. Finally, Wade straightened his shoulders. "We'll bury her this afternoon, on the hill behind the house next to Pa. Would you come if you can spare the time? It would mean a lot to the boys, and to me." "Of course," Willa replied without hesitation. "I'll ride back to town to fetch Reverend Miller and return by noon." "I'm obliged." Wade hesitated, then added, "And if you wouldn't mind spreading the word. Ma had friends in town who might want to pay their respects." Willa promised she would, gathering her things and preparing to leave. As she mounted her horse, Wade approached once more. "Dr. Hawkins," he said formally, "thank you for trying to save my mother." The words were simple, but the sincerity behind them was unmistakable. Willa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and turned her horse toward town. True to her word, Willa returned to the Jenkins ranch by noon, accompanied by Reverend Miller and a dozen townspeople who had known and respected Martha Jenkins. The service was brief but heartfelt, with each of Martha's sons saying a few words about their mother's strength and kindness. As the mourners began to disperse, offering condolences and practical help to the brothers, Willa found herself lingering. She watched as Wade thanked each person individually, his manner courteous despite his grief. "You're not heading back to town?" Wade asked when he noticed her still standing by her horse. "I thought I might check on Luke first," she explained. "That cough of his concerns me." Wade's brow furrowed. "I hadn't noticed. Been too wrapped up in Ma's illness, I suppose. It's probably nothing serious, but with consumption in the family." She left the implication hanging. "Please come inside then." Wade gestured toward the house. "I'd be grateful for your opinion." Inside, Willa examined Luke, who protested that he was fine despite the persistent cough that had troubled him for weeks. She prescribed a regimen of fresh air, plenty of fluids, and a herbal mixture to ease his chest congestion. "I'll come back in a week to check on you," she promised, packing her stethoscope away. "That's not necessary," Luke began, but Wade cut him off. "We'd appreciate it, Doctor," he said firmly, "and we can pay your fee." Willa waved away his concern. "We can settle accounts later. Right now, let's focus on keeping everyone healthy." As she prepared to leave, Wade walked her to her horse once more. The afternoon was waning, the shadows lengthening across the yard. "Will you be all right?" Willa asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "The three of you managing alone?" Wade's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, not quite a smile, but close. "We've been running this place with Ma too sick to help for months now. We'll manage." Willa nodded, but as she mounted her horse, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Jenkins brothers, especially Wade, had taken on more than they should have to bear alone. Over the next several weeks, Willa found herself riding out to the Jenkins ranch regularly. At first, it was to check on Luke's cough, which improved with her treatment. Then it was to stitch a gash on Matthew's arm after an accident with a barbed wire fence. Each visit gave her an opportunity to observe how the brothers were coping. The ranch was running efficiently under Wade's direction, but Willa noticed the toll it was taking on him. He was up before dawn and worked until well after dark, taking on the most difficult tasks himself to spare his younger brothers. The strain showed in the new lines around his eyes and the way his clothes hung more loosely on his frame. One evening in late May, Willa arrived unannounced, carrying a basket of food that Mrs. Thornton, the baker's wife, had sent along when she heard the doctor was heading to the Jenkins place. She found Wade alone in the barn, mending tack by lantern light. His head jerked up at her approach, hand moving instinctively toward the rifle propped against the wall before he recognized her. "Dr. Hawkins," he said, relaxing. "Didn't expect visitors this late." "I was out at the Carson place delivering a baby," she explained. "Thought I'd stop by on my way back to town." She held up the basket. Mrs. Thornton sent some bread and preserves. She seems to think you boys are starving out here." A rare smile crossed Wade's face. "Kind of her, though we're managing well enough with cooking. Matthew's taken to it surprisingly well." "Where are your brothers?" Willa asked, setting the basket down on a hay bale. "In town. Saturday night social at the church." Wade returned his attention to the bridle he was repairing. "Someone needed to stay with the stock. We lost a calf to wolves last week." Willa studied him in the golden glow of the lantern light. There were shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of insufficient sleep, and his movements, though efficient, betrayed a bone-deep weariness. "And you drew the short straw?" she asked lightly. Wade shrugged. "The boys deserve some fun. They're young." "And you're ancient at 28, Willa countered, earning another fleeting smile. "Some days I feel it." He set aside the finished bridle and stood, stretching his back. "Can I offer you some coffee? It's not as good as my mother's, but it's hot." Willa accepted, following him to the house. Inside, the main room was neater than she expected, though distinctly masculine in its Spartan arrangement. A pot of stew simmered on the stove, filling the air with a savory aroma. Wade poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for her to sit at the kitchen table. "What was it, boy or girl? The Carson baby?" "A boy. 8 pounds, healthy lungs." Willa smiled, remembering the infant's lusty cries. "Their third. Good family, the Carsons," Wade commented, sipping his coffee. "John helped us bring in our hay last season when Matthew took sick." They fell into easy conversation about the townspeople, the unusually wet spring that promised good grazing for cattle, and the rumor that the railroad might extend a spur line to Snowflake in the next few years. It was the longest Willa had ever spoken with Wade Jenkins, and she found herself enjoying his thoughtful observations and quiet humor. As the hour grew late, Willa reluctantly rose to leave. "I should get back to town. Someone might need me." Wade nodded, walking her to the door. "I appreciate you stopping by, Doc. It gets quiet out here sometimes." Something in his tone made Willa pause. "You miss her?" It wasn't a question, but Wade answered anyway. "Every day. She was the heart of this place." He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on his mother's rocking chair by the fireplace. "I keep expecting to see her there, mending or reading her Bible." Willa understood loss all too well. Her own parents had died within months of each other when she was in medical school, leaving her alone in the world except for a distant cousin in Boston whom she barely knew. "It gets easier," she offered gently. "Not better exactly, but the sharp edges wear down with time." Wade studied her face for a moment as if seeing something new there. "You sound like you know." "I do." She didn't elaborate and he didn't press. At the door, Wade surprised her by taking her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "Thank you for checking on us, Dr. Hawkins. It means more than you know." The sincerity in his voice stirred something unexpected in Willa's chest, a warmth that lingered long after she'd ridden back to town through the star-strewn night. Summer came to Arizona Territory in a blaze of heat and golden sunlight. Willa's practice kept her busy with the usual ailments: heat stroke, broken bones from ranch accidents, children's illnesses, and the occasional gunshot wound when tempers flared in the saloon. Through it all, she found herself thinking of the Jenkins ranch and its stoic owner with increasing frequency. Her professional visits to check on Luke's health gradually evolved into something less formal. Sometimes, she brought books she thought Wade might enjoy. He was surprisingly well-read for a rancher, having been educated by his mother who had once been a schoolteacher back east. Other times, she simply stopped by on her way to or from a patient, drawn by the peaceful atmosphere of the ranch and the quiet companionship Wade offered. In turn, Wade began appearing in town more often than strictly necessary. He would tip his hat to her when they passed on the street, sometimes stopping to inquire about her day. Occasionally, he would escort her home after she treated a patient late at night, insisting that a lady shouldn't walk alone in the dark, doctor or not. The townspeople noticed, of course. Snowflake was too small for anything to go unremarked upon, especially something as interesting as the growing friendship between the lady doctor and the Jenkins ranch's handsome owner. "Wade Jenkins was asking after you yesterday, Mrs. Patterson informed Willa one morning as she examined the older woman's arthritic hands. "Said he might stop by your office later. Something about his brother's cough, but if you ask me, that boy's healthy as a horse." Willa kept her expression neutral. "Luke had a serious chest infection this spring. It's only sensible that Mr. Jenkins is vigilant." Mrs. Patterson snorted delicately. "If you say so, doctor. Though it seems to me a man doesn't put on his good shirt and polish his boots just to ask about a brother's health." Heat crept up Willa's neck, but she merely smiled and changed the subject to Mrs. Patterson's medication. That afternoon, Wade did indeed appear at her small office on Main Street, hat in hand, and, as Mrs. Patterson had noted, wearing what appeared to be his Sunday shirt. "Mr. Jenkins," Willa greeted him, acutely aware of the curious glances from passers-by through her office window. "Is Luke unwell?" "Luke's fine," Wade replied, seeming slightly uncomfortable. "I actually came about something else." He cleared his throat. "The town's holding a 4th of July celebration next week. Picnic, dancing, fireworks if Sheriff Taylor can get them from Holbrook in time." "Yes, I've heard," Willa said, wondering where this was leading. Wade twisted his hat brim between his fingers. "I was wondering if you might consider attending with me." The request caught Willa off guard. They had developed a friendship, certainly, but this sounded remarkably like a social invitation, the kind that led to gossip and expectations. "With you," she repeated carefully. "As my guest," Wade clarified, his eyes meeting hers directly now. "I'd be honored by your company, Dr. Hawkins." The formality of his address contrasted with the warmth in his gaze, sending a flutter through Willa's chest that she hadn't felt in years, not since medical school, when a fellow student had briefly courted her, before deciding that a wife with a medical career wasn't what he wanted after all. "I would be pleased to attend with you," she heard herself saying. "But perhaps you should call me Willa, if we're to be social companions." A genuine smile transformed Wade's face, erasing the worry lines and making him look younger, more carefree. "Willa," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "Then you must call me Wade." "Wade," she agreed, returning his smile. The 4th of July celebration was the social event of the summer in Snowflake. The entire town gathered in the meadow by the creek, where tables groaned under the weight of contributed dishes. Bunting decorated every available surface, and a wooden platform had been erected for dancing. When Wade arrived to escort Willa from her small house near the clinic, she felt uncharacteristically nervous. She had spent more time than usual on her appearance, wearing a blue dress she rarely had occasion to don, and arranging her dark hair more carefully than was her custom. "You look beautiful," Wade said simply when she opened the door, his admiration evident in his expression. Willa felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." Wade had indeed made an effort, wearing a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. His normally unruly brown hair was neatly combed, though a single lock had already escaped to curl over his forehead. They walked to the celebration together, Wade offering his arm in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfectly natural. Willa was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed their arrival, but Wade seemed unbothered by the attention. "Ignore them," he murmured as they approached the gathering. "They'll find something else to talk about soon enough." The afternoon passed pleasantly. Wade introduced Willa to ranchers from outlying areas whom she hadn't yet met, speaking of her medical skills with unmistakable pride. They ate at a table with Luke and Matthew, who teased their older brother good-naturedly about his fancy manners. As dusk fell and lanterns were lit around the dance area, the town's small band began to play. Couples moved onto the wooden platform, skirts swirling and boots tapping in time to the music. Wade turned to Willa, a question in his eyes. "Would you care to dance, Doctor?" The formal address was belied by the twinkle in his eye. Willa hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I warn you, it's been some time since I've danced." "That makes two of us," Wade replied, taking her hand and leading her to the platform. His hand at her waist was respectful, but firm as they joined the other dancers. Willa had forgotten the simple joy of moving to music, of being led by a capable partner. Wade might not have danced recently, but he moved with the same confident grace he showed on horseback, guiding her smoothly through the steps. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked as they circled the floor. "My mother," Wade replied, a fond smile touching his lips. "She insisted all three of us learn, said no son of hers would embarrass a lady on a dance floor." "She was a wise woman, your mother," Wade nodded, his expression growing thoughtful. "She would have liked you, not just for trying to save her, but for who you are." She always admired people who followed their own path. The simple statement touched Willa deeply. So few people in her life had truly supported her choice to become a doctor. Even those who accepted her skills often viewed her profession as an unfortunate necessity rather than a worthy calling. "I would have liked to know her better," Willa said softly. They danced in comfortable silence after that, the music and the warm summer night creating a bubble of contentment around them. When the song ended, Wade didn't immediately release her hand. "Would you walk with me for a bit?" he asked. "It's getting rather warm here." Willa nodded, and they slipped away from the crowded dance floor toward the creek. The night air was indeed cooler by the water, scented with cottonwood and wild mint. Fireflies blinked in the darkness, competing with the stars that filled the Arizona sky. They strolled along the bank, talking quietly about everything and nothing, books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they still harbored. Wade spoke of his hope to expand the ranch someday, to breed horses as his father had once planned to do. Willa shared her desire to establish a proper hospital in Snowflake, small but adequately equipped for more complex procedures than she could currently perform. When they reached a fallen log that formed a natural bench overlooking the creek, Wade gestured questioningly. Willa sat and he joined her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Thank you for coming with me tonight," Wade said, his voice low. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed myself this much." Willa smiled, though she wasn't sure he could see it clearly in the dim light. "I've enjoyed it too." "Willa," Wade began, then hesitated. "I don't want to presume, but I've come to value your company greatly these past months." The earnestness in his voice made her turn to look at him. His face was half in shadow, but his eyes reflected the starlight, intent on hers. "I value yours as well," she replied honestly. "I've been alone since my mother died," he continued. "Not physically, I have my brothers, but in here." He tapped his chest lightly. "Until you started coming around. You bring something to the ranch that's been missing. Something I didn't even know I needed." Willa's breath caught in her throat. "Wade, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you have your practice, your independence. I respect that more than I can say. I wanted you to know what your friendship has meant to me." The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. In Philadelphia, men had occasionally shown interest in her, but always with the expectation that she would eventually abandon her medical career for marriage and motherhood. Wade's respect for her profession, his understanding of its importance to her, was something entirely new. "Your friendship has meant a great deal to me too," she said softly. "More than I expected when I first rode out to your ranch." Wade's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm and strong as they curled around hers. "Then perhaps we could continue as we have been. I could call on you properly in town sometimes, not just when one of us is sick or injured." The hopeful note in his voice brought a smile to Willa's lips. "I would like that very much." In the distance, a burst of light and sound announced the start of the fireworks. Wade didn't move to return to the celebration, and neither did Willa. Instead, they sat side by side on the log, hands linked, watching the colorful explosions reflect in the creek water and listening to the delighted exclamations of the townspeople. It was, Willa thought, one of the most perfect moments she had experienced in a very long time. As summer gave way to autumn, Wade's visits to town became a regular occurrence. He would appear at Willa's clinic on Wednesday afternoons when she had fewer patients, sometimes bringing fresh vegetables from the ranch garden or a book he thought she might enjoy. They would walk through town together, drawing knowing smiles from the citizens of Snowflake who had long since decided that the handsome rancher and their lady doctor made a fine couple. In turn, Willa continued to ride out to the Jenkins ranch, no longer needing medical concerns as an excuse. She found herself looking forward to these visits, to the peaceful hours spent on the porch talking with Wade while Luke and Matthew tended to chores, to the simple meals they shared, to the gradually deepening connection between them. One crisp October day, Willa arrived at the ranch to find Wade in the corral, working with a spirited young mare. She dismounted and leaned against the fence, watching as he moved with the horse, his voice a constant, soothing murmur that the mare responded to with gradually decreasing nervousness. "She's beautiful," Willa commented when Wade finally approached the fence, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "A new acquisition, born here last spring," Wade replied, his face lighting with pride. "She's out of my father's favorite mare. Got her damn spirit and her sire's intelligence. She'll make a fine saddle horse once she learns to trust." Willa had learned enough about horses during her time in Arizona to appreciate the young mare's clean lines and alert expression. "What's her name?" "Haven't settled on one yet." Wade leaned on the fence beside her, their shoulders touching. "Any suggestions?" Willa studied the chestnut mare, who was now cautiously investigating a saddle blanket Wade had left draped over the fence. "What about Copper for her coloring?" Wade tilted his head, considering. "Copper," he repeated. "I like that. It suits her." He whistled softly and the mare's head came up, ears pricked toward him. "What do you think, girl? Are you Copper?" The horse nickered softly and took a step toward them, making Wade laugh. "I think she approves." They spent the afternoon together, with Wade showing Willa the improvements he'd made to the ranch over the summer: a new section of fencing, repairs to the barn roof, an expanded vegetable garden that would help see them through the winter. His pride in the place was evident in every word, every gesture. "You've accomplished so much," Willa said as they walked back toward the house as the sun began to set. "Your mother would be proud." Wade's expression softened. "I hope so. Everything I do here, I find myself wondering if she would approve." "From what you've told me about her, I'm certain she would," Willa assured him. As they reached the porch steps, Wade suddenly stopped and turned to her. "Willa, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." The seriousness in his tone made her heart quicken. "Yes. Thanksgiving is coming next month. Luke and Matthew and we'd be honored if you would join us for dinner." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "It won't be fancy, but Matthew's gotten pretty good with the cooking, and I would love to," Willa interrupted gently, touched by his uncertain expression. Relief washed over Wade's face. "Really? You don't have other plans in town?" Willa shook her head. "No plans. Thanksgiving was always quiet for me, even back east. My parents died before I finished medical school, and I don't have other family." Something in Wade's expression shifted, a softening around his eyes. "Well, you do now," he said quietly, "if you want." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Willa found herself unable to look away from his face, from the open affection and hope she saw there. "I'd like that," she whispered. Wade moved closer, his hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. "Willa," he said, her name almost a question. She answered by closing the distance between them, her hand resting lightly on his chest as their lips met in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. Wade's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming something more profound than either had expected. When they finally parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers, his breathing slightly unsteady. "I've been wanting to do that for months," he admitted. Willa smiled, her heart beating rapidly in her chest. "Why did you wait so long? I wasn't sure you felt the same way. You're so independent, so capable. I didn't want to presume." He brushed a strand of hair from her face with tender care. "And I wanted to be sure this wasn't just gratitude talking." "Gratitude," Willa repeated, puzzled. "For what you did for my mother, for how you tried to save her." Wade's expression grew serious. "I didn't want you to think that was the only reason I was drawn to you," understanding dawned. "Oh, Wade, that never crossed my mind." "Good." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way she had come to love. "Because while I am eternally grateful for your kindness that night, what I feel for you now has nothing to do with the past and everything to do with who you are." They stood together on the porch as twilight deepened into night, talking softly and sharing occasional kisses, reluctant to end this new chapter of their relationship. When Willa finally had to leave a pregnant patient in town, was nearing her time, Wade helped her mount her horse with lingering hands and a promise to see her soon. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were filled with work for both of them. A minor influenza outbreak kept Willa busy in town, while early winter storms had Wade and his brothers scrambling to prepare the ranch for the coming season. Still, they found moments to be together, quick visits when Wade came to town for supplies, Sunday afternoons when Willa could get away from her patients. Each meeting deepened their connection, as they shared more of themselves with each other. Willa told Wade about her struggle to be accepted in medical school, about the professors who had tried to discourage her, and the colleagues who had refused to work with her. Wade spoke of his fears after his father died, of the responsibility he felt toward his mother and brothers, and of his determination to make the ranch succeed despite the challenges. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, Willa felt as though she had known Wade Jenkins all her life. The ease between them, the understanding that required few words, was unlike anything she had experienced before. The Thanksgiving dinner at the Jenkins ranch was everything Wade had promised, and more. Matthew had indeed become skilled in the kitchen, preparing a feast that included a roast turkey, cornbread stuffing, sweet potatoes, and an apple pie that Mrs. Thornton herself would have approved of. The dining table, polished to a shine for the occasion, was set with Martha Jenkins' best china, a little worn but lovingly cared for. Luke had decorated the house with pine boughs and late-blooming wildflowers, giving the simple rooms a festive air. A fire crackled in the hearth, keeping the late November chill at bay. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, filled with the brothers' genuine pleasure in having Willa join their family celebration. After dinner, they sat around the fireplace, sharing stories and memories. Luke and Matthew recounted childhood adventures, often involving Wade rescuing them from their own misadventures. Wade, in turn, told tales of their parents in younger days, preserving their memory for his brothers and sharing that history with Willa. As the evening grew late, Luke and Matthew tactfully excused themselves, leaving Wade and Willa alone by the fire. The room was dimly lit now, the lamplight and fire creating a golden glow that wrapped around them like a blanket. "Thank you for today," Willa said, leaning comfortably against Wade's shoulder as they sat on the small sofa. "It was wonderful." Wade's arm tightened around her. "Having you here made it special for us too. The house has felt more like a home since you started visiting." His words warmed her heart. For years, Willa had been dedicated to her profession, finding fulfillment in helping others but often returning to an empty house. With Wade, she had discovered a different kind of fulfillment, the joy of being truly known and accepted, of finding partnership without sacrificing her identity. "I've been thinking," Wade said after a moment, his voice thoughtful, "about us, about the future." Willa sat up slightly so she could see his face. "Oh, I know we haven't been courting long by most standards," he continued, a hint of nervousness in his tone. "And I don't want to rush you, but I also want to be honest about my feelings." He shifted to face her more directly, taking both her hands in his. "Willa Hawkins, I've come to love you, not just for your kindness or your intelligence, though I admire both greatly, but for your strength, your compassion, your unwavering dedication to what you believe is right." His eyes held her steadily. "I love the way you stand up to men twice your size when their children need treatment. I love how you ride out in all weather to help a patient. I love your smile and your laugh, and even the way you furrow your brow when you're concentrating on a difficult case." Tears pricked at Willa's eyes as Wade's words washed over her. No one had ever seen her so clearly or valued her so completely. "I'm not asking for an answer today," Wade continued, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "But I want you to know that whenever you're ready, if you ever feel the same way, I would be the happiest man in Arizona territory to make you my wife." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a proposal, not quite, but a declaration of intent, a promise of devotion that required no immediate response. Willa found herself overwhelmed with emotion. She had not come to Snowflake looking for love. Her focus had been on building her practice, on proving that a woman doctor could succeed even in this remote corner of the territory. Marriage had seemed a distant possibility at best, something that might happen someday with someone who could accept her unconventional life. Yet here was Wade Jenkins, a man who not only accepted her career but admired it, who saw her dedication as a virtue rather than an obstacle. A man who had shown his character through the care of his family, his stewardship of his land, and his treatment of everyone around him with respect and kindness. "Wade," she said softly, squeezing his hands, "I don't need more time to know how I feel. I love you too." Joy bloomed across his face like sunrise over the desert. "You do?" "I do," she confirmed, her own smile widening. "I love your steadiness, your integrity, the way you care for your brothers and this land. I love how you listen when I talk about medical cases that would make most men squeamish. I love your patience and your strength and the gentleness that balances it." Wade's smile was radiant now. "Willa, are you saying I'm saying yes?" she interrupted, her heart so full she could barely contain it. "Not someday, not eventually. Yes now, if you're asking." For a moment, Wade seemed stunned into silence. Then he gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I'm asking," he whispered against her hair. "Willa Hawkins, will you marry me?" "Yes," she repeated, laughing through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Wade Jenkins." Their kiss was sweet and tender, a seal on promises made and a future envisioned together. When they finally parted, Wade kept her close, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said, "I never expected this when you rode out to our ranch that night. I was so focused on my mother, on the fear of losing her, that I hardly noticed the remarkable woman trying to save her. And I was focused on my patient," Willa admitted. "I barely registered you except as Martha's worried son. Yet here we are." Wade's hand cupped her cheek gently. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the greatest blessings." Willa nodded, understanding completely. Her life had taken many unexpected turns, but none as surprising or as welcome as finding love with the quiet rancher who had thanked her for trying to save his mother, and then stayed by her side, becoming first a friend and now so much more. Winter settled over Snowflake, bringing snow to the high desert and quieter days for both Wade and Willa. The news of their engagement spread quickly through town, met with general approval and only a few disappointed sighs from young women who had harbored hopes regarding the handsome Jenkins rancher. They agreed to a spring wedding, giving them time to prepare and allowing the worst of winter to pass. In the meantime, they began making plans for their future together. The most significant decision was where they would live, at the ranch or in town. "I can't abandon my practice," Willa explained one evening as they sat in her small parlor in town. "There's no other doctor within 30 miles. "I would never ask you to," Wade assured her, his hand warm around hers. "Your work is too important." "But the ranch is your legacy, your responsibility," Willa acknowledged. "You can't simply move to town." They discussed various possibilities, Wade staying in town several nights a week, Willa riding out to the ranch when she could, perhaps even building a small clinic at the ranch for patients from outlying areas. Finally, they reached a compromise that felt right for both of them. "The ranch is only 5 miles from town," Wade pointed out. "If we improve the road, you could make the trip easily when weather permits. And we could add a room to the house specifically for your medical supplies, so you'd have what you need for emergencies." "And I'd keep my office in town," Willa added, warming to the idea. "I could stay there when necessary during storms or if I have patients who need close monitoring." Wade nodded. "Luke and Matthew are old enough to handle the ranch for a day or two if needed. And in time, perhaps we could hire help, especially during busy seasons." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it acknowledged the importance of both their commitments, Wade to his family's land and Willa to her patients. More importantly, it represented their willingness to adapt and compromise for each other's sake. As winter deepened, they continued their courtship despite the challenges of weather and distance. Wade would ride into town whenever the trails were passable, sometimes staying overnight at the small hotel when snow threatened. On clear days, Willa would bundle up and make the journey to the ranch, where Wade had added a wood stove to the parlor to ensure her comfort. Christmas brought a brief respite from winter's isolation. The town held its annual celebration at the church, with a pageant performed by the schoolchildren and carols sung by candlelight. Wade and his brothers joined Willa in town for the festivities, the 4 of them forming a family unit that felt increasingly natural. After the church service, they exchanged gifts in Willa's small house. She had knitted scarves for Luke and Matthew, and for Wade, she had found a handsomely bound edition of Thoreau's Walden, remembering his mention of admiring the philosopher's writing. Wade's gift to her came in a small wooden box, carved with delicate wildflowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a gold ring set with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," Wade explained as Willa gasped in surprise. "My father gave it to her when they became engaged. She left it specifically for the woman who would one day make Wade happy, as she put it in her letter to me." His eyes met Willa's, filled with emotion. "She didn't know who that would be, of course, but I think she would be pleased it's you." Tears welled in Willa's eyes as Wade slipped the ring onto her finger. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." Luke cleared his throat, breaking the emotional moment with brotherly pragmatism. "Does this mean we're getting a doctor in the family?" "Because Matthew's always hurting himself, and it would save us a lot of riding back and forth to town." They all laughed, the joyful sound filling Willa's small house and cementing the bond between them. January and February passed in a blur of winter storms and preparations for spring. Willa continued her practice in town, while Wade and his brothers readied the ranch for calving season. They saw each other when they could, each visit reinforcing their certainty in their decision to build a life together. By March, signs of spring began to appear across the high desert landscape. Wildflowers pushed through the soil, cattle grew restless in their winter pastures, and the days lengthened noticeably. With the improving weather came increased activity for both Willa and Wade, more patients traveling to town now that the roads were passable, more work at the ranch as the new season began. Despite their busy schedules, wedding plans proceeded. They had decided on a simple ceremony in late April to be held at the ranch with Reverend Miller officiating. Willa had ordered a dress from a catalog, nothing too elaborate but more special than her everyday attire. Mrs. Thornton had volunteered to bake the wedding cake, and other townspeople offered contributions of food, flowers, and music for the celebration. One crisp April morning, 2 weeks before the wedding, Willa was at her office treating young Billy Watson's broken arm when she heard a commotion outside. Hoofbeats pounded down the street, followed by shouting. A moment later, her door burst open to reveal Matthew Jenkins, his face pale with urgency. "Doc Willa," he gasped, out of breath from his hard ride. "It's Wade. There's been an accident at the ranch." Willa's heart seized in her chest. "What happened?" Bull gored him. He was checking the new calves, and the bull came out of nowhere. Matthew's words tumbled over each other in his haste. "Luke's with him. He's bleeding bad, Willa." She moved instantly into action, her personal fear submerged beneath professional focus. "Mrs. Watson, can you take Billy to your sister's? She can finish setting his arm." Without waiting for a response, Willa began gathering supplies, filling her medical bag with everything she might need for a serious injury. "How bad is it exactly?" she asked Matthew as she worked. "His side's torn open. Luke's trying to stop the bleeding, but—" Matthew swallowed hard. "He was conscious when I left, told me to fetch you, but he looked awful pale." "You brought the wagon." At Matthew's nod, she continued, "Good. Help me load these supplies. We'll need to move quickly." The ride to the ranch was the longest of Willa's life, despite Matthew pushing the horses to their limit. She clung to the wagon seat, medical bag clutched in her lap, her mind racing through treatments for goring injuries. The most immediate danger would be blood loss, followed by infection. She had seen men die from less serious wounds when sepsis set in. No, she wouldn't think that way. Wade was strong, healthy, and she was a good doctor. She would save him. She had to. When they finally reached the ranch, Luke met them at the door, his shirt covered in blood. "He's in his room," he said without preamble. "I got the bleeding slowed but couldn't stop it completely." Willa hurried inside, Matthew close behind with her supplies. Wade lay on his bed, his face ashen against the white pillowcase. His shirt had been cut away, revealing an ugly wound that ran from his lower ribs to his hip on the right side. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandages Luke had applied. "Wade," she said, setting her bag down and immediately checking his pulse. It was rapid but steady, a good sign. His skin felt cool and clammy, indicating shock. His eyes fluttered open at her voice. "Willa," he murmured, "sorry about this." Despite her fear, a small smile tugged at her lips. "Typical. You had to go and get yourself gored 2 weeks before our wedding." A ghost of his usual smile crossed his face. "Bad timing." "Very bad," she agreed, already working to remove the soaked bandages. "Now lie still and let me fix this." For the next hour, Willa worked with focused intensity, cleaning the wound, assessing the damage, and stitching torn flesh with meticulous care. The bull's horn had missed vital organs, though it had torn through muscle and left a jagged wound that would take time to heal. Luke and Matthew assisted silently, following her instructions without question. They boiled water, handed her instruments, and held lamps to provide better light as the afternoon waned. Their faces were grim with worry, but they remained steady, their concern for their brother evident in every careful movement. Finally, Willa tied off the last stitch and straightened her aching back. "That's the best I can do for now," she said, washing blood from her hands in the basin Matthew had provided. "The wound is clean and I've repaired the damage, but we'll need to watch closely for infection." "Will he be all right?" Luke asked, his voice uncharacteristically small. Willa looked at Wade, who had drifted into an exhausted sleep after she had given him laudanum for the pain. "If we can prevent infection, yes. He's lost a lot of blood, but he's strong. The next few days will tell." Those days became a vigil that tested Willa's medical skills and her emotional strength. She stayed at the ranch, sleeping in a chair beside Wade's bed, waking frequently to check his temperature and change his bandages. Luke and Matthew took turns managing the ranch and sitting with their brother, their young faces growing haggard with worry as the hours passed. On the second night, Wade developed a fever. Willa fought it with cool compresses and willow bark tea, her heart racing with fear as his temperature rose and his breathing grew labored. She whispered prayers as she worked, promises to God and to herself that she would not lose him now, not when they had found each other against such odds. By dawn, the crisis had passed. Wade's fever broke, leaving him weak but lucid. When he opened his eyes to find Willa slumped in exhaustion beside his bed, he reached out a trembling hand to touch her hair. "You're still here," he murmured. Willa straightened immediately, her professional mask slipping to reveal the fear and relief warring in her expression. "Of course I'm still here. Where else would I be? You look tired." His concern for her, even in his weakened state, brought tears to her eyes. "I'm fine," she assured him, taking his hand and checking his pulse automatically. "You're the one who decided to tangle with a bull." A weak chuckle escaped him, followed by a wince of pain. "Not my brightest moment." "No," she agreed, helping him sip water from a cup. "But you're going to be all right. The wound is clean and the fever's broken. You'll need time to heal, though." Wade's expression grew troubled. "The wedding can wait," Willa said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere, Wade Jenkins." "We'll have our wedding when you're well enough to stand without passing out." Relief softened his features. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." She leaned down to press a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Now rest. Doctor's orders." The days that followed brought steady improvement. Wade regained his strength gradually, progressing from staying awake for longer periods to sitting up in bed to finally, a week after the accident, taking a few careful steps around his room with Willa's support. Throughout his recovery, Willa divided her time between caring for Wade and making brief trips into town to check on her other patients. The people of Snowflake rallied around them, bringing food to the ranch and offering help with chores so Luke and Matthew could focus on the essential ranch work. Mrs. Patterson organized a group of women to postpone the wedding arrangements, sending word to Willa not to worry about anything except getting Wade well again. Reverend Miller visited regularly, bringing spiritual comfort and practical assistance in equal measure. By the end of April, Wade was able to move around the house with the aid of a walking stick, though the effort tired him quickly. His wound was healing well, the angry red line fading to pink as new skin formed. Willa watched his progress with both professional satisfaction and personal joy, her love for him deepened by the experience of nearly losing him. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Wade turned to her with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he began. "A dangerous pastime," Willa teased gently. He smiled but continued, "about what happened, about how close I came to." He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. They both knew how narrowly he had escaped death. "Wade, let me finish," he said, taking her hand. "It made me realize something. Life is uncertain, especially out here. We make plans, but there are no guarantees." Willa nodded, understanding all too well the fragility of life and the sudden turns fate could take. "I don't want to wait any longer to make you my wife," Wade continued. "If you're willing, I'd like to have a simple ceremony here at the ranch as soon as possible. Nothing fancy, just us and whoever can attend on short notice." His earnestness touched her deeply. "Are you sure you're strong enough?" "I can stand long enough to say my vows," he assured her. "And if I can't, I'll say them sitting down. I just don't want to waste any more time." Looking into his eyes, Willa saw the same certainty she felt in her own heart. "All right," she agreed. "A simple ceremony, next week if Reverend Miller is available." Wade's smile was worth all the sleepless nights and anxious days of his illness. "Next week," he repeated, lifting her hand to his lips. "I can hardly wait." True to their word, they were married the following Saturday in a small ceremony on the ranch porch. Wade stood unaided, though Willa noticed how he leaned slightly on the porch railing during the longer parts of the service. His face was thinner than before his accident, but his eyes shone with happiness as he promised to love and cherish her for all his days. Willa wore the dress she had ordered, a simple but elegant creation of blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes. Mrs. Patterson had found wildflowers to make a bouquet, and Mrs. Thornton's wedding cake, though hastily prepared, was a masterpiece of sugared frosting and fresh preserves. The celebration was modest but joyful, with the townspeople who had become their extended family gathering to wish them well. Luke and Matthew beamed with happiness for their brother, teasing Willa about officially becoming their sister, but also thanking her privately for saving Wade's life. As the afternoon waned and the last guests departed, Wade and Willa found themselves alone on the porch, watching the shadows lengthen across the land that was now their shared home. "Mrs. Jenkins," Wade said, testing the name with evident pleasure. "Dr. Hawkins Jenkins," Willa corrected with a smile. "Professionally, at least. I've worked too hard for my credentials to abandon them entirely." Wade nodded, unsurprised. "Dr. Hawkins Jenkins it is, though I hope you don't mind if I call you simply my wife now and then." "I would be disappointed if you didn't," she assured him, leaning against his good side as his arm wrapped around her waist. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, contemplating the future that stretched before them, a future neither had imagined when Willa had first ridden to the Jenkins ranch on that fateful night to tend to a dying woman. "Your mother would be proud," Willa said softly. "Of you, of Luke and Matthew, of what you've built here." Wade's arm tightened around her. "I think she arranged this somehow," he said, only half joking. "Sent you to us knowing what would happen." A rather roundabout matchmaking scheme, Willa observed wryly. But I suppose I should be grateful, whatever brought us together. Even if it began with the worst night of my life, Wade asked, his tone gentle despite the painful memory. Willa turned to face him, her hands coming up to frame his beloved face. Even then. Because that night, in the midst of loss and grief, you thanked me for trying to save her. You saw me as a doctor first, not just a woman. You respected my efforts even when they failed. She smiled softly. And then you stayed by my side, becoming my friend, my support, and now my husband. How could I not be grateful for that journey, however it began? Wade's eyes, so like the Arizona sky, filled with emotion as he drew her closer. I love you, Willa Hawkins Jenkins, he whispered. And I promise I will thank you every day of our lives together for being exactly who you are. Their kiss sealed that promise as the sun set over the ranch, bathing the land in golden light and casting long shadows that stretched toward a future filled with love, partnership, and a shared commitment to healing both bodies and hearts in the community they had come to call home. Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of childish laughter drifted through the open window of the Jenkins ranch house, now expanded to include not only Willa's medical room, but also a nursery for their 3-year-old son, William, and infant daughter, Emma. Willa smiled as she finished bandaging young Tommy Carson's arm, the boy having fallen from a tree in a misguided attempt to retrieve his kite. There you go, Tommy. Good as new in a few weeks, provided you stay out of trees for a while. Tommy nodded solemnly, clearly more concerned about his father's reaction than his injury. Pa's gonna tan my hide for climbing that old oak after he told me not to. Well, I'll have a word with him, Willa promised. Explain that you've already learned your lesson. Relief washed over the boy's freckled face. Thanks, Dr. Hawkins Jenkins. Outside, the sound of hoofbeats announced John Carson's arrival to collect his wayward son. Willa walked Tommy out to the porch, where Wade was entertaining little William by pretending to be a horse, crawling on all fours while the toddler giggled and clung to his back. Dr. Hawkins Jenkins, John greeted her, tipping his hat. Tommy giving you trouble? Nothing serious, Willa assured him as Tommy scurried to his father's side. A clean break that should heal nicely. He'll need to keep the splint on for at least 4 weeks. While Willa explained Tommy's care to his father, Wade scooped William up and joined them on the porch. The boy immediately reached for Willa, who took him in her free arm with practiced ease. Mama, Papa was a horse, William announced proudly. I saw, Willa replied, smiling at Wade's disheveled appearance. A very fine horse indeed. John Carson's eyes crinkled with amusement as he settled Tommy on his own horse for the ride home. You Jenkins men are lucky to have such a fine doctor in the family, he remarked to Wade. Saved more than one of us over the years. Wade's arm slipped around Willa's waist as he nodded in agreement. Don't I know it, he said, his voice warm with affection. She saved me in more ways than one. After the Carsons departed, the family retreated inside where Luke, now a strapping young man of 25, was cradling baby Emma while Matthew prepared dinner. The brothers had remained at the ranch, though Luke had recently become engaged to the schoolteacher's daughter and was planning to build a small house of his own on the property. How's my favorite niece? Wade asked, gently taking Emma from Luke's arms. The infant gurgled happily at her father, her tiny hand wrapping around his finger with surprising strength. Hungry from the sound of it, Luke replied with the confidence of an uncle who had already helped raise one Jenkins baby. Dinner's almost ready, Matthew called from the kitchen. At 23, he had developed into not only a skilled cook, but also Wade's right hand in running the ranch, which had prospered significantly over the past 5 years. The practice she had established in Snowflake had flourished as well. With the railroad's arrival 2 years earlier, the town had grown, and Willa had trained a young nurse to assist her both in town and at the ranch clinic. She divided her time between her medical duties and her family, finding balance in a life that was busier than she had ever imagined, but also more fulfilling. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked quietly as Matthew served the stew, and Luke entertained William with stories of the new foal born that morning. Willa smiled, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "About how far we've come. About that night when I rode out here, not knowing I was riding toward my future." Wade's hand found hers under the table, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "The worst night that led to the best life," he murmured. "I thank God every day that you didn't give up on us." "Never," Willa promised, her heart full as she looked around at their family, the family that had begun with loss and grief, but had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. "I will always stay by your side." And she had. Through all the challenges and joys of their life together, the doctor and the cowboy, who had found healing in each other's love.